As a child growing up in Flint, Michigan, I remember this one summer that my mom and a friend of hers decided that they wanted to take a road trip to Monroeville, Alabama, her birthplace, a place she hadn't visited since she was 5 years old, when her family migrated from Monroeville to Michigan in the year 1917. So here we are on the road, and as we're driving from Ohio to Kentucky, she says, "Elaine, we're crossing the Mason-Dixon line. Things are getting ready to be very different for us." And I didn't quite understand what that meant. But when we got to our first rest stop, there above the water fountains were two signs, one that said colored and the other one said white. And that was in the year 1961, where segregation was alive and well and sick in Southern America. So you can imagine in my little 9-year-old eyes looking at this, just being very, very perplexed. And then, then I thought, well, maybe that might have something to do with why there's so much food in our car. Because it turns out we couldn't stop at restaurants to eat because we never knew where or when we could possibly get served. And we had to drive straight through without stopping at a motel, because would there be hotels to stay at? They couldn't take those chances. So my mom and her friend just alternated driving and sleeping and driving and sleeping. And at last we arrived to Monroeville, Alabama. My mom actually took me to the plantation where her grandmother was a slave. We visited the colored graveyard and saw the headstone of her grandmother and other ancestors. And I realized that as a young person, I not only witnessed America's version of apartheid, but I also witnessed the dismantling of it through the Civil Rights Movement, through the Civil Rights Act. I was able to see all of that and watched us move from being colored to Black to African American. And that whole idea of being African American, that resonated with me. I thought, well, since I'm living in a pigmentocracy, why not define ourselves by from whence we come? But now when I went to Africa for the first time, that put a whole nother spin on the concept of being African American. Because when I got to Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya in 1985, it just felt like I was home again. I don't know if it was like a cellular memory or something, but I remember distinctly walking down the street and seeing all these incredibly familiar faces. It was like, oh my God, he looks like my Uncle Harry, and she looks like my neighbor Iola, and that he looks like my cousin Butch. Familiar faces. I noticed the women had these huge head wraps, and that reminded me of how in my mom's church the women wear these big hats. And once we went to a local dance club, and I could just so freely dance with the people. The moves all came to me so naturally, and I realized, that even though our slave masters had worked so hard at stripping all vestiges of our African past from us, they had not completely succeeded. There was still a lot of Africanness in me, and I could feel that being in Africa. I remember went to our first restaurant there, and it was a buffet, and there was black-eyed peas and okra and cornbread and watermelon, and it was things that were very, very familiar to me. And I was like, it's old home week here for me. And one experience that really stood out in my mind is when we went to the bush, deep, deep into the country, where we met a Maasai tribe people, and our guide was explaining to them who we were and where we came from. And they were really surprised, because they had never, I was actually surprised as well, they had never heard of America, they had never heard of slave trade, they had never heard of slavery. So they just thought we were kind of odd-looking Africans. And I thought, that's it. I'm an African who's from America. It was so clear to me. And through that experience, it was as if I got part of my soul back. And interestingly enough, I didn't even know it was missing. But when I got back to America, I noticed my head was, holding my head a little higher. My back was a little straighter. I had this sense of belonging, this sense of place, this sense of pride that I came from a continent that was so gloriously beautiful and such a rich place. And I actually visited Africa several times since then. But last year was the first time I visited West Africa, where the region where my ancestors are actually from. I had a wonderful, grand, and glorious time in Ghana. But after leaving, I thought, you know, I like this whole intellectual and emotional connection to Africa, but I want the real thing. I want to know from whence I really come. So I decided I'm going to have my DNA tested. I'm going to find out for sure, where am I really from? Where are my people really from? So I contacted AfricanAmericanAncestry.com, ordered my little kit. They sent it. I got it out of the mail bag and got my little swabs, and I tested, you know, stroked the inside of my cheeks and put them in a tube, sent it off. And 2 months later, which happened to be September 26th of this year, I learned that I am from the Bamileke tribe of the Cameroons. And it was almost surrealistic, but yet truly wonderful to find out from whence I come, and it gave me a sense of strength and pride and dignity. I thought it was a wonderful gift to give myself and also my family, and particularly the young people in my family, so that they could grow up with a sense of from whence they come. And upon my discovery, it reminded me of this poem that I love by Maya Angelou, and I'm going to wind up with reciting just an excerpt from this poem. Out of history's shame I rise, up from a past rooted in pain I rise, into a world that's gloriously clear I rise, bearing the gifts my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.